just say that this has been an important study. We're on chapter 6 now of that study. Political report is something that I have a responsibility providing to the party's Congress on every occasion. And the report is due out of at least 3 months prior to the Congress, giving the party membership an opportunity to look at the report, examine it, critique it, make a determination of whether or not it accurately reflects our journalists' understanding of where things are in the world in terms of the international national situation, the conditions of African people, direction that we have to go, the strength and weaknesses of the party, etc. It's a very important document because the ability of the party to unite with this document is a critical aspect of what we call democratic centralism, where it is centralized leadership under democracy. And the democracy, the democratic aspect of this is the Congress being the highest body of the African People's Socialist Party, where all of the membership or its delegates are able to come together and to make the critical decisions, given direction of the party between the Congresses and themselves. And it allows these issues and positions to be debated, resolutions to be passed, leadership to be elected, etc. And then once this leadership is elected, it has the firm unity of the entire party, and it has the authority to provide leadership to the party based on the decisions that we made in this Congress that have been democratically determined by the entire party. 1990, the party was essentially the only genuine revolutionary organization that was functioning, and we had assumed for ourselves the responsibility not only of upholding the party, but of advancing the entire struggle of African people for national liberation. We called it the pro-independence movement. We called it that sector of the movement that was about self-determination, freeing ourselves from colonial domination by the U.S. and other colonial governments. And the party found it necessary to really promote and project and protect that sector of the movement, because that was the sector that had come under fire by counterinsurgency efforts all around the world that were determined to stop peoples from winning our liberation from colonial and foreign domination. We also were engaged in very serious struggles with what has been called the white left, the forces who identify themselves often as Marxists and communists on the one hand, but whose actions and whose politics, whose theory, whose ideology worked in opposition to the liberation of Africans and other peoples around the world. What we see by the study is that there's a certain consistency throughout the history of our party in trying to bring science to the movement, which is really important, because even today we see people who try to base politics on whether somebody likes them or not. This is clear when we talk about the kind of anti-racism politics that makes the assumption that the politics has to be against racism or the ideas in the minds of white people, whether white people like us or not. But also sometimes we hear this in some of the higher ranks of our own movement and party. It's really not reflective of a scientific understanding of African internationalism, that our politics is not based on whether somebody likes us or whether we like them. Not only is that true in general terms, but even inside our movement, we've found situations where we call it subjectivism when it relates to how people want to have relationships inside the party based on whether people like each other or not. And we call for a much higher standard than that. And that's what the significant role of the party has been, is struggling to bring science to the revolutionary movement so that people can have the ability to identify what our material interests are, and to be able to fight like hell around these material interests, as opposed to fighting around whether somebody likes us or whether we like them or not. One of the questions the party has posed to the entire movement historically is whether we are fighting for love or for liberation. And we have decided in the party a long time ago the struggle is for liberation. We will see that, as I mentioned, one of the struggles that we were engaged in very seriously was against the so-called white left, the so-called Marxists, or and I say so-called because I understand at one juncture Marx became so frustrated by people who call themselves his followers that he had to say, all I know is I'm not a Marxist. And there were other kinds of people who call themselves leftists, socialists, communists, etc., and who would liquidate or undermine the struggles of Africans and other colonized people in order to maintain their own status as dominating the world, and had put forth certain kinds of formulations that made the struggles of Africans and others simply auxiliary forces to white groups and white aspirations that call themselves leftists, etc. So what I want to do is begin, and we're on page 71. This is chapter 6, and the title of this chapter is The Impact of the Theory of African Internationalism. And in 1990 and even up to today, it's really important that we are talking about the question of theory, because this is one of the struggles that we've had with the African liberation movement for years and years and years, this issue of theory, the theoretical weaknesses of our movement historically, which meant that in most instances, our movements were dragged around by what was happening at the moment, and it was often unable to articulate or project a future based on something beyond what was happening at the moment. So we begin here on page 71. All of our work is guided by our understanding that our struggle for national liberation within U.S. borders is an integral part of the whole African liberation movement. That the African liberation movement itself is a part of the great contest between the ever-emerging forces of international socialism and the dying but not yet dead forces of imperialism. That the particular character of the African liberation movement within the United States is a struggle against U.S. domestic colonialism. That the destruction of colonialism, led by a conscious Black Revolutionary Socialist Party, will constitute the critical blow in the struggle for socialism within U.S. borders. These words constitute the basic line of our party. They are more than just a statement or a group of words, however. These words represent the theoretical development of our party, a theoretical development that has informed the practice of our party and provided essential leadership for our entire anti-colonialist movement in the process of overcoming the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s and advancing the revolutionary process. So I want to just say something briefly about that. This is what we had characterized as the basic party line. This was in 1990, and we had been running this statement here for a long period of time in the Burning Spear newspaper, basic line of the African People's Socialist Party, because we thought it was a real concise kind of statement of what that explained who we were and the immediate objectives of the revolution. However, the other thing about this is that it represents part of the struggle that we were making with the so-called white left at the moment, which had defined the struggle of African people and Mexican people and other people who were colonize inside the United States as some kind of auxiliary forces whose only role and responsibility was to support the so-called working class, which meant white, in the struggle for power, and then somehow we get the benefits that might come from that. It's kind of trickle-down socialism. And we fought this and disagreed with this in a very serious way. And that's why we have here this statement within quotes. That's in the first sentence paragraph here, where we said that the destruction of colonialism led by a conscious Black Socialist Party would constitute the critical blow in the struggle for socialism within U.S. borders. And the reason that statement is there is because it was a way of trying to articulate that there cannot be any socialism without the destruction of colonialism. That, in fact, capitalism as a social system was something that rested, as we've articulated over and over again in this and other studies, on the pedestal of the oppression, the colonization of Africa, the theft of this land, the domination of the indigenous people, etc. And this whole notion of socialism that was being put forth by the white left was one that somehow would allow them to come to power. White folk, now they call themselves workers, come to power. The Africans, the condition of Africans, Mexicans, indigenous people, etc., remained the same. Well, that's basically what this statement was attempting to deal with, that the way toward the destruction of capitalism would be to get rid of the pedestal upon which capitalism rested. Slavery, colonialism, the oppression and of the Mexican people inside what the current borders of the United States, the domination, the colonial domination of the indigenous peoples here. That this is the way to destroy capitalism. But the error in this statement is that the destruction of capitalism being one thing, and it's critically true and important about the strategic direction, what it would take to destroy capitalism is the liberation of the colonial people, and especially the African people here. It is an error to make the mission of the struggle of Africans and other people the achievement of socialism inside the United States. The indigenous people are not fighting necessarily for socialism inside the United States. The Mexicans, the African people, what we're fighting for is national liberation. As a consequence of national liberation, we're saying that capitalism could be destroyed, and then the ability for socialism to come about is based on that. Otherwise, what we seem to be doing is the same thing the white left is doing, is talking about making the mission something about the workers coming to power, as opposed to the liberation of African Mexicans and the other peoples. I mean, anyway, this is what we're grappling with here, and that's why you no longer see this as the basic party line, because of that part that seems to make the mission the achievement of socialism within United States borders. And another thing is that, so we're talking more moving forward. So we say this is important because our revolution of the 60s was defeated before it had really deepened its theoretical works, notwithstanding its impact in this regard on white nationalist bourgeois theory. Moreover, our revolution was defeated before ideological contradictions within the broad anti-colonialist tendency were resolved. So they were ideological just because, we'll see more. In fact, the primary ideological struggles given rise to the leadership of the revolutionary anti-colonialist tendency were the struggles against U.S. imperialist white power and the integrationists, the liberal African primitive petty bourgeoisie that acted as imperialism agent within the Black liberation movement. This is what essentially had united the broad Black power or movement, the anti-colonialist movement. It was the struggle against imperialist white power and against the integrationists or the assimilationists, the liberal African petty bourgeoisie that acted as imperialism's agent within the Black liberation movement. That struggle had been won. That inside the African community, the integrationists, assimilationists were on the run. They had lost this ideological struggle. You know, they didn't have a leg to stand on. The impact of not only forces like Malcolm X, but you know, at some point the Black Panther Party, JOMO, other revolutionary organizations, anti-colonialist organizations had taken up most of that space. And so the NAACP, the Jesse Jackson guys, I mean, these guys, you know, were effectively on the ropes. That the integrationists had lost this battle. And the only thing that brought them back into prominence was the destruction, the attack on the anti-colonialist movement. The assassinations and what have you, Malcolm, and the attack on the Black Panther Party, the JOMO, this is the thing that allowed and created the space, and then their elevation through the bourgeois media created them as the respectable, legitimate entities after they wiped everybody else out. So, but the revolution, but that was the broad thing. This is what had been united on within the movement: white power against white power, against, you know, the white man, white power, the establishment. And against the integrationists or the assimilationists. This was the broad thing that had happened. But the revolutionary anti-colonialist sector of our movement was neither theoretically nor ideologically homogeneous, although its unity in opposition to white power and integrationism or servile assimilation kept this from being obvious. So it wasn't that obvious that it was not a homogeneous movement. It wasn't that obvious. It wasn't that obvious that it was not a completely united movement, because where there was unity, generally speaking, within the movement, was against white power and against the integrationists or assimilationists. That was the unity that had been. But there were tendencies within here that had not been able to fully express themselves, and that there was no real debate around this. In fact, when you say Black power, that meant 1,000 different things to 1,000 different groups. Just like self-determination means 1,000 different things to 1,000 different groups. So the ideological tendencies within the broad Black power anti-colonialist movement had not been struggled through, and the movement was crushed before there was an opportunity to bring clarity in this debate between the different tendencies. So the following excerpts from a December 1981 issue of the Burning Spear represent an example of the party's effort to deal with the continuing contradictions within the anti-colonial movement and to settle all ideological accounts. The article was in reference to a pending self-determination conference hosted by the short-lived National Black Human Rights Coalition, a new Africanist formation that was founded in part to contend with the influence of our party and our mass organization, the African National Prison Organization, ANPO. So the party had created ANPO in 1979. And some of the people who were supposed to be a part of that from the New Africanists and actually came to try to disrupt that when at the founding conference in Louisville, Kentucky, they created this entity that was called the National Black Human Rights Coalition. And they had this conference in New York, and we participated in the conference, and it was at this place that this is an excerpt, or these are excerpts from the presentation I made there to try and raise some of the ideological differences that exist within the movement, and that we actually have with the people who were sponsoring the conference. And this is a quote. The fact that Black people as a people, and I'm mentioning this not just to show that we had a debate with them, but in the quote is to be found some of the ideological positions of the party as opposed to, and some clarity, I believe, theoretical clarity around our struggle for liberation. The fact that Black people as a people are colonized by U.S. imperialism establishes the basis for cross-class alliances within the domestic African colony. So there's a basis that's said right here for cross-class alliances, right? The fact that we are colonized as a people established the basis for cross-class alliances. And what I mean by that is that as a people, when a whole people is colonized, then that means all the classes are colonized among that population. You see what I'm saying? The whole people are colonized. That means every sector of that population lives under colonialism. You with me on that? That's the real important point. So based on that, then there is also the basis for cross-class alliances. Since everybody is colonized in the nation, then the African working class then has, like the African petty bourgeoisie, has been the one that's always initiated this cross-class alliance. So they didn't say it was cross-class. They said they represented all the people, but it was the African workers and what have you, and in some instances peasants that were put in motion under the leadership of so that this sector of the African population, this section of the nation, could win its interest in the struggle against colonialism. Y'all with me on that? So the basis then for cross-class alliances exists because, by the fact that the whole nation is colonized, every class. He said this is because nearly the whole people have a contradiction with imperialism, including most of the black petty bourgeoisie, which aspires to become the new ruling class. This fact means that the question of national liberation has a different meaning for the black petty bourgeoisie than for the majority of the black population who are poor, oppressed workers. The national liberation of the aspiring black petty bourgeoisie is a liberation from the limitations of its development into a full-blown bourgeoisie, which are imposed on it by domestic colonialism, the imperialist rule by foreign gangsters. That's the problem for the African petty bourgeoisie, as they're part of the nation, but what colonialism does to it is prevent it from becoming a full-blown bourgeoisie. It keeps it from becoming the big bourgeoisie. So that's the basis for their opposition to colonialism. Do you understand what I'm saying? So they are opposed to colonialism, but from their own selfish self-interest, because colonialism gets in their way. It won't allow them to get contracts. It won't allow them to have the motion to get what they need as a social force, right? So if they are opposed to colonialism, what I'm saying is that it gives the basis for a cross-class alliance with them, right? And in our opposition to colonialism, but what their opposition to colonialism means something different from our opposition to colonialism. This is the basic point that I'm making. So we said that within this concept of national liberation is the germ of the future continuing exploitation of the African working class by black bourgeoisie, which has been liberated from the national oppression which prevented the emergence of a free, independent black boss. You with me? This is the concept of national liberation that is embraced by the African petty bourgeoisie. It is a concept that that will allow the germ, we say the germ of the future. National liberation, their concept of a national liberation is the germ of the future continuing exploitation of the African working class by a black bourgeoisie, which has been liberated from the national oppression, which prevented the emergence of a free, independent black boss. Such a national liberation is not in the interest of the colonized African working class. You with me on that? The black petty bourgeoisie wants to be liberated from colonialism, but as a class, their liberation means something different. But when they lead a struggle, they're leading the struggle toward what their aims are, what their class interests are, even though they do it in the name of the black population. You with me? So, but for them, they want the same thing the white man has or the big boss has. They just want to be the big boss now. And they can't be the big boss either because of this domination by white power. So this is what gives them a character of patriotism, national patriotism of a sort. They become patriotic in their opposition to white power. Yes. Yes. So they are, you can call them, and sometimes they're militant. They even have guns. They've even fought the white man with guns to achieve this status. And this is what's really important for us. So national liberation means something different to them than it does to us. Because they can win, as they have won all over Africa. They've won. But then the masses still catching the same hell they were caught before, because the masses didn't have the African People's Socialist Party to fight for national liberation in the interest of the majority of the people, and certainly of the interest of the African working class. All right? So, the national liberation of the aspiring black petty bourgeoisie, again, is a liberation from the limitations of its development into a full-blown bourgeoisie, which are imposed on it by domestic colonialism, the imperialist rule by foreign gangsters. Within this concept of national liberation is the germ of the future continuing exploitation of the African working class by a black bourgeoisie, which has been liberated from the national oppression which prevented the emergence of a free, independent black boss. Such a national liberation is not in the interest of the colonized African working class. And sometimes, even after, like there are people who come approach us now. And for example, after the black grand jury, people came up and say, I want to talk to you because I got this idea of a good program. And because the black grand jury spoke to the question of national liberation. Black people, white people got a grand jury, black people got a grand jury. That's national liberation. That's the question of the African nation. But when they mean, what they perceive in this is something different from what the party perceives in this. Because they got a program and they continue to try to track me down and say, look, this is what I want to do. And I want the help to do this. And they got this great program that doesn't actually challenge the existing setup, but it makes possible for some kind of advancement, either for the emergence of more African petty bourgeoisie strengthening. That's what even in many ways, well, I won't go there. But we've been, you know, every now and then we get these calls about videos for what we did with the Black People's Grand Jury, because somebody got this great idea. And it's a great idea. It's not something that emancipates the workers. That's why we even had people who spoke at the Black People's Grand Jury who could not condemn, in the real sense of the word, in some absolute terms, the police, and hold up the African working class. And you were there, you know what I'm talking about. They could not make that kind of, even though they could be opposed to what the police did, in many circumstances, most circumstances, they could not condemn it in the deepest possible way. Couldn't do it because they want control of that apparatus for their own interests. Yes.
So is that what you mean by the people who always betray the revolution?
I mean, as a social force, that's exactly, because as a social force, the African petty bourgeoisie will always betray the revolution as a social force. That class will do it. Doesn't mean that there won't be elements from that class that will betray the class and commit class suicide and join with the African working class. You understand what I'm saying? That's why it's also important for us to be clear and politically, scientifically sound and clear in our politics, so that we don't just go around condemning Uncle Toms. And we're not talking, you know, what's an Uncle Tom? Because what you call an Uncle Tom could be an actually sector of the African working class who's just stupid, and the black petty bourgeois speaking through his mouth. Yes. Or it doesn't give room for somebody to abandon the position that they have. So we want to be as clear as possible. And it's not about somebody liking us, it's about you, and somebody can't even find their way to the politic if they're confused by this subjective articulation. So we make sharp criticisms, but the criticism, we fight for them to be as scientific as possible, as sound as possible. Now, sometimes in the agitational situation, of course, we do something different in the agitating masses of people to make a move. You don't have time to be this selective, except when we got the space and the time, then we're as clear as we have to be. So we say, the The national liberation of the working class is a liberation which will sweep away all forms of oppression and exploitation. All forms of oppression and exploitation. The national liberation of the domestically colonized African working class is not only interested in removing the oppression of foreign rule, it is also interested in destroying the class rule which exploits the workers and toiling masses of all countries where the capitalist system prevails. So we're not only interested in removing the oppression of foreign rule. When I say foreign rule, what are we talking about in this instance? Say it quickly. The colonizers, be more explicit. You can actually now be not as scientific. Right, the white man. This is not just about getting, foreign, oppression. It's not, but destroying the class rule which exploits the workers and toiling masses of all countries with the capitalist system fit. That's what's important for us to be able to say. And sometimes when you just say the white man, right, you don't necessarily get to the fact of the system, right, that is responsible, this class rule. That's class rule. Because you can get rid of the white man and still have the black, that petty bourgeoisie. Look at all over Africa, Duvalier in Haiti, who was murderous, and right now the Negroes who prop up the Haitian regime in relation with the U.S. What about people like Mobutu and all those Negroes who are in power all over Africa? That you got these Pan-Africanists talking about they want to become part of the sixth region of the African Union, when the damn African Union itself is an instrument of bourgeois rule over the masses of African people, and an instrument of white power. So just to join that is not the way forward, but that's what a sector of the African petty bourgeoisie is looking for. And these are so-called progressives because they call themselves Pan-Africanists. You with me? Okay, so class rule is a goddamn problem. That's a fundamental contradiction that we have to deal with. The national liberation of the working class is explicitly anti-capitalist and consciously a part of the worldwide socialist movement. That's the national liberation of the working class, of the African People's Socialist Party. From this, it is clear that although our struggle for national liberation will take advantage of short-term alliances for the assault on foreign domination, on domestic colonialism, it should be equally clear that the long-term interests of the African working class and the black petty bourgeoisie nationalists are diametrically opposed. That in the long run, the African working class must emerge from the struggle against national oppression as the dominant social force, as the burning spear which will light the road to socialism. So our objective, we have come into these relationships, but our objective is to come out of them as the dominant social force. That is to say, the African working class goes into these relationships, but we aren't just there to be kissy-kissy. Even though we may be kissy-kissy, it's a matter of flirtation as opposed to, it's not a real engagement, right? And so we have to come out of here as the dominant, the working class must come out of here as the dominant social force. The black petty bourgeoisie within current U.S. borders find itself in a peculiar situation. It is a petty bourgeoisie which is part of a domestic colony. That is to say, the people are not colonized on the land of their heritage by foreign oppressors, right? This ain't our land. Therefore, the question of liberation has caused it tremendous confusion. This is the petty bourgeoisie. Unlike the petty bourgeoisie on the continent of Africa, it cannot realize its avaricious aim to become the capitalist ruling class by simply chasing foreign oppression off indigenous land. Like in Africa, kick the white man out, boom, you become the boss. Doesn't work that way here. One sector of the black petty bourgeoisie has capitulated to one or another sector of the U.S. white ruling class, which pays it off in the forms of economic and political privilege, state-supported jobs, prestige, and administrative rights of the colonialist social programs designed to pacify the black working class. Usually, what you see is this relationship, the NAACP and other sectors of the petty, these social programs, they run them. They are a sector, they actually represent the white ruling class. And so there's a sector that gets paid off. That the Democratic Party, they fight hard for the Democratic Party because there's going to be more social programs, more jobs for their class, their children are going to be guaranteed a future, etc., because of these damn social programs that fatten them. And then every community, and if not just the social programs, it's the effects of the NAACP when the white man the system has jobs and stuff like that, or programs they call the NAACP. The NAACP pick their people and put them in places, etc. So this is a really profitable kind of relationship with them, and they'll fight for Hillary. They'll fight for all of these people who are there, and whether they like Hillary or not, they fight for Hillary because Hillary is this relationship. And in Chicago, you understand, is better than any place in the world. In Chicago, where the Democratic Party has dominated, you can't get a job unless you're a Democrat, except, but they provide all of these, connections and things like that. So not just you're a Democrat, but you become a functionary of certain in your community and other places like that. Not just in Chicago, also that's true in South Africa and various other places. Okay, one sector of the black petty bourgeoisie has capitulated to one or another sector of the U.S. white ruling class, which pays it off in the form of economic and political privilege, state-supported jobs, prestige, and administrative rights of the colonialist social programs designed to pacify the black working class. However, there is another sector of the black petty bourgeoisie, which, because of the inability or unwillingness of the white ruling class to pay it off with privilege, loot, and prestige, or because its ability to see that the white ruling class has a tenuous future, or both, takes a more militant and anti-imperialist posture and is capable of demanding political independence from this system, which does not allow it to realize its bourgeois ambitions. Okay, this sector can demand political independence. For this last sector of the black petty bourgeoisie, the question of land is supremely important as a base upon which to launch the development of a black bourgeois state. Y'all with me on that? That's what happened with Israel. Well, we'll say a little more about that, even though even in this passage it's a little confusing. But they need a state. This sector of the black petty bourgeoisie, and it is a landless social formation which cannot realize its aspirations to become the bourgeoisie without land. In this sense, it is similar to the landless Jewish bourgeoisie, who was prevented by anti-Semitism from becoming integrated into the national bourgeoisie in Europe, and consequently launched a reactionary nationalist Zionist movement, which resulted in partnership with imperialism, the theft of Palestinian land, and the establishment of the illegitimate state of Israel. So you got these 5 state people and all these, they want this damn land in order to establish a bourgeois state. And that's what happened with these white people who, were Jewish and needed a state in order to establish their own, to express their own aspirations. This is a sector of the Jewish population. And so this is why the whole question of Israel became viable. It also became viable because capitalism itself, the thing that brought wealth to white people was colonialism. And it is the example. That's what sent Prince Leo, that's what sent Prince and then King Leopold in the Congo for Belgium, because that's what sent Cecil Rhodes into South Africa, because the recognition that if you're gonna get rich, then what you got to do is become this imperialist. And so the Jews were no different from any of the other white capitalist people. The Jewish capitalists were no different, and they understood that if you're gonna carve out this sector of leadership and get these resources, then you got to have a state. You got to have your own state. That gives them the ability to contend with other parts of capitalism. You understand? Because there's capitalism coming out of France and Germany and all these other places, and some of them will not leave space and room for other sectors to come into. That's one of the features of capitalism, is that it does not easily allow other competition. It doesn't allow competition. So this sector, in this instance, the Jewish capitalists who who wanted to compete had to have their own state, and they had to win other Jews to unity with this aspiration. And so they stole some land, and this is what the African petty bourgeoisie in the African community would have to do if they want to have their landless. Just like the Jews didn't have the land in Germany, they have no. How are they going to compete? So they said, that's our land over here. First it was in Uganda, and then it's now in Palestine. And that gives them a state in order to establish a bourgeois state. And now you got Africans in this country who would take somebody's land too, because they're landless in this country. The African petty bourgeoisie is landless. So in order to become the bourgeoisie, it has to have land. Otherwise, you do what? You integrate into the existing, which is what a sector of the African petty bourgeoisie does. Y'all with me on that? Yeah, okay. So, because of the contradiction inherent in its landlessness, this sector of the black petty bourgeoisie has been forced to contrive a variety of metaphysical bourgeois premises upon which to base its claim to land. One section of this sector has pushed forth a notion that liquidates the history of our struggle by creating an imaginary historical process which forged African people into a new nation since our enslaved arrival in the US. It is from this faction that we see variations of the Black Belt South theory being pushed based on the premise that Africans within the US are no longer Africans, but are now a part of the Negro nation. That's one concept. The Afro-American nation or the new African nation, etc. Another faction of what we might call the radical patriotic sector of the black petty bourgeois nationalists, while recognizing the historical basis for our national African nationality, has, unlike the Black Belt South advocates, which denied the past, denied the present by liquidating the specificity of our struggle for liberation wherever we are located. This faction simply recognizes Africa as the solution without accurately and definitively posing the question. So one section denies the whole history and somehow creates Africans in this country. That somehow this new African or the Negro nation emerges as a consequence of what's happened to us in this country, which separates us obviously from the whole history of the struggle of African people around the world. That's one sector we might call patriotic. And then there's another sector which denies the present by liquidating the struggle that we're involved in right now and dealing that Africa is a solution, but does not require struggle inside the United States. It doesn't. You look at the AAPRP, it doesn't require any revolutionary struggle. It doesn't. It can't even define imperialism in a way that identifies a contradiction to be fought against, struggle against, just in concepts and ideas. The significant thing about both factions composing this tendency and their militant rhetoric both leave imperialism, that is to say, system of class rule responsible for present-day African oppression and colonization off the hook. Both of them leave it off the hook. Neither of these tendencies presuppose an assault on US imperialism, which would destroy the national oppression of African people, as well as the class exploitation of workers, despite the fact that from 90 to 94% of the African population within the US are workers. It is the party's understanding that philosophical and line questions represent a class outlook, which makes it imperative for the party to participate in this event in order to represent the views of the African working class, which has an interest in the end of national oppression, but which is also the only class formation within the domestically colonized population with an absolute need in the destruction of class rule and the struggle for socialism. And that's unquote. So that was the thing that we took to that conference that they had in New York. And there were some interesting forces at that conference that we participated in. Amiri Baraka was on that platform. Saudi Muhammad from the African People's Party was on that platform. And a lot of other nationalists were on that platform when this presentation was made. So we were, this is not just a closet discussion we were having. We were actually contending at that moment with those different forces. So while our broad anti-colonial movement was able to experience general unity in opposition to colonialism or foreign domination, it had not resolved the question of what kind of social system we were fighting to achieve for our people, or what social force was key to achieving that social system. This is critical. The movement had not answered the question of what kind of social system we were fighting to achieve for our people, or what social force was key to achieving that social system. What I mean by social force, I'm talking about. Talking about what class? What class? I mean, that says something about your strategy, how you're going to be organized, etc. If you're fighting for liberation, then what social force is critical, is the key force. And we said that's the African working class. And the African working class, to make that struggle, has to have its own organization, self-interested organization. That's what the African People's Socialist Party is. So we say, after the defeat of our revolution, the theoretical work developed by the African People's Socialist Party played a major role in rebuilding the general anti-colonial tendency. For almost 20 years, the Burning Spear, the oldest revolutionary African journal in the United States and the only surviving anti-colonial newspaper from the Black Revolution of the 60s, defended the anti-colonial tendencies, shared the practical political experiences of our party, and kept African militants abreast of every theoretical advance we made. Look, this was really important because we saw and said that the primary task that we were involved in as the party was defending the whole anti-colonial position, the whole pro-independent sector of the African liberation movement. Some of these sectors did not represent the African working class. I've just mentioned some of them. But the thing is that we had to defend the broad anti-colonial tendency because we were under, that tendency was the critical thing that was under assault within the whole, by the bourgeoisie proper. That's what J. Edgar Hoover, when he initiated the COINTELPRO, he identified the primary target as so-called Black nationalist hate groups. And all of the people around the world have begun to recognize as a consequence of our being wiped out and the propaganda of the bourgeois agitprop, which was all of the white media, the ruling class media, the integrationists and all these forces were the dominant were being defined as the dominant forces, African petty bourgeoisie. So we had a responsibility as the party who were working in the interest of the African working class to lead the struggle for national liberation, as well as for the defeat of capitalism, the ascendancy of the African working class. The African working class cannot ascend by itself. We have to also advance the movement, and we had to therefore promote and defend the anti-colonial position at large, not the specifics of the new Africanist politic, not the specifics of what the Nation of Islam was talking about or any of those forces, but as opposed to the position of integration and assimilationists, which had been by default, by gunning down and imprisoning the rest of us, had become what appeared to be the dominant force out there. We had to hold up not just the party, not just African internationalism, but the right of African people to be self-determining. And that was the right that you found in the politic of the New Africanist movement, the Republic of New Africa, all these other forces. So in addition to just, y'all with me on this? Yeah, and so we saw this as a part of our strategy. And we did defend them, and we did carry that. And because much of the so-called black liberation of black nationalist movement could not defend itself ideologically and politically against the assaults that were being made against us, could not defend itself against the white left communists who are working in league, whether consciously or not, with the whole imperialist assault on the struggle for national liberation. We were the ones who did that, and we were the ones who used the burning spear to keep people aware of the existence of the others of them, even when there were groups like the African People's Party who were supposedly doing something, but they would see us in the streets with the burning spear in places like Oakland, and they would come up and say, you can't do this, and you can't sell a paper because everybody's got to be underground because of the terror, and you got to be clandestine. We were the ones who were out there. Our party was the ones who were out there holding that up. When the MOVE forces got bombed, right now people have short memories, but it was the African People's Socialist Party that went into Philadelphia and held an African Liberation Day movement there. That's what took us into Philadelphia, because we recognized that when they bombed MOVE, the objective was not just to get rid of those people, but they set an example for any African there that this is what happens to you when you go up against white power in a certain way. That's why we said reinforcements on the way. We went into Philadelphia, had mass demonstrations, and MOVE activists who had been underground, had driven underground. We provided platforms for them to come and speak at events that we organized, etc. We defended the whole national liberation movement when it was incapable, generally speaking, of defending itself. Somebody said, be careful what you wish for. So one such theoretical, we said here that that the Burning Spear newspaper shared the practical political experiences of our party and made African militants abreast of every theoretical advance we made. This was not a small thing, because there was a point in the 1960s where you could pick up a newspaper and read about a rebellion or read about struggles that African formations were making, and the bourgeois media would tell you exactly what they were saying. And I'm sitting in St. Petersburg, and I can read that this is what somebody's saying in New York, California, and I was able to get the benefit of their experiences where I'm located. Because the white people, the bourgeoisie would say that. Then the bourgeoisie got smart, and they began to run the line that they were not going to report anything that the militants were saying, because somehow the militants were manipulating the media, et cetera, and they shut it down so that we could not communicate. We couldn't use their instrument anymore to communicate with each other. That's why our own newspapers became extraordinarily important. That's why it's important right now, because they will shut you down too. They will come to your press conference when they want to come to your press conference. If they don't want to come here, they won't come. That's why we have to have our own capacity and not rely. And even though we might send out press releases, but they cannot be key to what we see as the success of getting the word out. We have to create those instruments, and that's what we did with the Burning Spear newspaper for a long time. And one of the things that we did was one such theoretical advance dealt with the question of colonialism itself. While various forces within our movement had defined ours as a struggle against colonialism, our party has done much to deepen our understanding of the theoretical basis for the colonial definition. Look, this is a real long chapter, and I'm hoping that we can get through it. It means that I'm going to have to be more expeditious than I have been up to now. And I'm hoping that people read this. These are really important studies. And part of what I see my task is right now is to help develop real cadre. People who can handle these questions. That's why we go through all this history and stuff like that, so you know what it is that we're dealing with. It's not just some stuff that's happening today. It's not just the ability to be cute on Facebook or some stuff like that, but we have to have leaders here who can project a real future for our people and be prepared and equipped to do that. We have to raise, especially from Agitprop, from the Department of Education Propaganda,
we have to recreate a culture of intellectual, struggle. I mean, so that the African working class must create our own revolutionary intellectuals. And it doesn't mean talking like them or acting, but we have to understand this stuff if we're going to actually, provide leadership for our movement and our struggle. And that's why we go through that's why I'm going through all of this. It's really important. To have a revolutionary organization that's informed by a scientific approach. And I have been in the company of organizers and militants who with revolutionary organizations that I really respect and what have you. And I think one of the outstanding features of who we are is really a struggle for theoretical and political clarity. And up and down throughout our organization, throughout our membership, and which is one of the reasons that will always be a relatively small organization, because of what we require in terms of the development of cadre who can become leaders and who can lead mass organizations, who can lead the masses. And when I say lead the masses, sometimes in the form of organizations and committees that we create out there in the world. For example, right now, I'm convinced that we need to have some kind of African Parents Association. I'm talking about having to do with what happens to students in the schools.
Yes.
We have the ability, for example, in this city, we got enough children who are in the school system, who are connected to members of the party and what have you, who can then provide leadership for broad masses of parents whose children are catching hell in the damn schools.
Yes.
That's why we provide political education, have cadre who can lead on every front. You don't just come and find this little cozy relationship with everybody who just agree with you, who like everything you say. But what about all those parents who have not come into the movement, but who are sickened every day by what's happening? The children coming home with horror stories, the white ruling class media writing all these stories about factories of failure in terms of what's happening to the children in school, policemen beating up the children, police on the campuses and stuff like that. Why shouldn't there be an organization of parents that's led by people who are from our party? Don't even call ourselves the party or Hura movement. We call together a meeting of parents, of the students in this system, and create a mass organization. It's just led by us. This is what the point I'm making is, that we are trying to create, we say, from members to cadre, from cadre to leaders. That's what it is that we want to have, so that people who are in these studies and people who are in our organizations need to have the ability on these in these communities to begin organizing around these critical questions. Doesn't mean that everybody comes in the party, everybody comes in NPW, but we got a cadre out there, and we extend our presence by connecting with the masses. That's why we do these studies, so that people can understand have some history of how struggle has happened, what's the basis of the struggle, and what the critical questions that we have to be able to deal with at any given moment. And all of these contradictions with the students, with their parents, that represent themselves a certain way, there is a universal contradiction that has to do with the fact that African people live under colonial domination. Colonial domination, we know that. And that it's this colonial domination that gave birth to capitalism that has made the white world rich at our expense. We know this. And that can inform us even when we're doing struggle around parents in the school system or any other kinds of thing that's happening in our communities. We have to engage the masses. And anyway, what we're doing now with these studies is trying to equip people in our party so that we can have real cadre who can take on these critical questions and can understand them. And in a short fashion, even get some of the history of the development of these questions, not just inside our own party, but in the world and certainly in this country, and with the national liberation movement as has been expressed in this country and in various other places. Y'all with me? Y'all with me? All right. Okay. So we say that the question of colonialism And say, for example, the following is an excerpt from the February 1978 presentation I made in San Francisco, California, to a North American sponsored political event at one of the party's first California political activities. It is the presentation from which the basic party line quoted above was taken, and it was printed in full in the Burning Spear. And this is it, quote, "The African People's Socialist Party was not the first to disclose the colonial condition confronting Africans within current U.S. borders. Malcolm X was one of the first leaders of the Black pro-independence movement to articulate our major contradiction with U.S. imperialism as colonialism. He said, quoting Malcolm, "America is a colonial power. She has colonized 22 million Afro-Americans by depriving us of first-class citizenship, by depriving us of civil rights, actually by depriving us of human rights," unquote. Malcolm also stated quite emphatically in that same speech in New York on April 8th, 1964, there are 22 million African Americans who are ready to fight for independence right here. He's talking about independence. That's in 1964. Stokely Carmichael, now known as Kwame Ture, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which were leading forces in the mid-1960s, also put forth an anti-colonial position, as did the Black Panther Party during the height of its political influence in this country. Albert Memmi, author of The Colonizer and the Colonized, first published in 1957, also dedicated the American edition to, quote, "the American Negro also colonized." So what we just done here is show that the question of African colonialism is not some weird thing that we just snatched out of the sky and decided inside the African People's Socialist Party that we would embrace. It's been something that's been recognized and struggled around for a long period of time. And here we have Mamie, who I've forgotten, I think he may, I don't know if he was from Tunisia or some other place. In 1957 is dedicating the book to the so-called American Negro, also colonized. However, what our party did discover that made for a qualitative leap in understanding how to move toward liberation is that in the US, colonialism represents the relationship of class to race. Prior to this discovery, our party was one with most of the pro-independence movement in describing ours as a struggle against racism. At the same time, we were calling it a struggle against colonialism. We were saying we were in error. We used to say that racism and colonialism, same thing. But, and so that was similar to what everybody, many people were saying. We would equate racism and colonialism. That is to say, our movement, still under the ideological influence of the primitive petty bourgeois civil rightists, whose colonialist mentality often equated freedom with their proximity to white people, incorrectly used the terms racism and colonialism to define the same set of circumstances and oppressive structures responsible for our freedom. However, at the moment, we were able to understand that what we had been describing as institutional racism was the same thing we meant by the term colonialism, and that these same set of circumstances and oppressive structures imposed on our people were also defined as colonialism historically throughout the world. Our ideological and political development increased 1,000-fold. This understanding of colonialism helped us to place the responsibility for our oppression squarely upon the shoulders of the North American ruling class. But one point that we're making here is that if the same things that happen to us, the same structures are at work here, are called racism, why aren't the same thing that's happening to people in Afghanistan, people in Vietnam, all these other places, why is that racism too? How can it be colonialism when it happens to them, but it's racism when it happens to us? And that's a deadly trap, because as long as you're fighting against racism, you're fighting to improve the damn colonial system. You fight against colonialism, you're fighting against the system itself. You're fighting against racism, you're fighting to improve it, which means to improve the ability of the colonizer to maintain its control over us. That's not a simple question. So our party was able to discover that our main or primary struggle is against colonialism, which is an imperialist form, therefore necessarily having class connotations. and which utilizes the ideology of racism to justify and obscure the fundamental relationship that African people within the U.S. have with the capitalist colonialist ruling class state. We get much better moving forward in the years to come, you know, since 1990 in defining this, but this was pretty good. This was written in 1980 for something in 1981 or something, 82, at a presentation in San Francisco that I'm quoting from. We discovered that colonialism is the condition we suffer from as a people, and that racism is the ideology that justifies or obscures that relationship. So colonialism is the relationship that we suffer from, but is the condition we suffer from, and racism is the ideology that justifies or obscures that relationship. Colonialism is real and concrete. It is a human-made condition that can be struggled against. On the other hand, we discover that racism is the ideas in the heads of North Americans. Racism is the attitude displayed by North Americans which make you whites dupes, allies, and collaborators with your ruling class in its attacks on us, which reinforces and maintains our colonial relationship to the U.S. North American state. When Black people struggle against racism as the main or primary condition, we are struggling against ideas which are in the heads of the vast majority of European and U.S. North American people. There's no identifiable source of political power to overcome, and the enemy must necessarily be viewed as a politically homogeneous and monolithic group of people who are racially defined and have no exploitable political differences, and who, because they are defined racially, represent a permanent condition which can never be overcome short of their extermination. But the thing about this sentence here, or this paragraph, so there's no identifiable source of political power to overcome, and the enemy must be necessarily viewed as a political homogeneous and monolithic group of people who are racially defined and have no exploitable political differences. And that's really important, because there's a certain nationalist sector, people who, unite with the whole racism thing, who define white people in general terms as the enemy, and they're white. And because they're white, they're the enemy. And that means that it does not allow us to identify any kind of exploitable contradiction that exists among the group. Do you understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Among this group, there are no contradictions that we can exploit in order to advance our own struggle, because they're just all white people, and the white people are the enemy. So you can't even develop tactics and strategies that can move your struggle forward as it relates to white people, because they're just white. And there's nothing you can do about that except kill all of them, which is not feasible. That is not to say that the anti-Black ideas in the heads of North Americans cannot harm us. History will not tolerate such a claim, but the way in which they harm us is such that they serve to maintain our colonial relationship with the U.S. North American capitalist colonial state. That's how they hurt us. That they keep us locked into this damn relationship with white power. Therefore, it should be clear that what we generally refer to as racism is simply individual North Americans carrying out the U.S. policy of colonialism. Our understanding of colonialism as a relationship of class to race within the U.S. has also revealed for us the inherent reformist character of a struggle by Black people against racism. For ultimately, the struggle against racism, when it is given material form, boils down to a struggle for equality with the exploited North American working class. I could have left that part out. That is to say, equality within capitalism. That's better. It calls for equality within capitalism. This kind of struggle not only places severe restrictions on the forward motion of our struggle for political independence, but it also puts a brake on the development of the entire US-based North American struggle for socialism. And this was absolutely unnecessary too. A struggle for Black people against racism or for integration is a struggle for admittance into the present system, and therefore leaves the system generally unattacked, as it must necessarily presuppose the system to be worthy of our desire for admittance, right? If you struggling against racism, you're struggling to be admitted into the damn society, that means there must be something about the damn society that's worth fighting for, dying for, as we have done, such a struggle is actually a vindication, therefore an inadvertent perpetrator of the system, while a successful struggle against colonialism will mean the certain death of this system. There's a whole different consequences to what it is we're fighting for. Inevitably, a struggle for equality acts as an apologist for capitalist exploitation. It presupposes the great U.S. except for the inequality between Africans, other subject nationalities, and the peoples in the U.S. North American working class. It is a left-handed liquidation of the oppression of women, of homosexuals, of the criminal theft of surplus value. It makes the social and economic system within current U.S. borders appear legitimate. Else, why would Africans be struggling for equality within it? Such a struggle obscures the fundamental contradiction confronting African people within the U.S., which is colonialism, as well as the basic class antagonisms inherent in capitalism. In the African People's Socialist Party, we were able to discover that while the vast majority of Black people within the U.S. have to work for a living and are exploited at the point of production, such exploitation does not constitute the primary contradiction for Black people within the United States. The primary contradiction for Black people within the United States does not have to do with our present relationship to the means of production. The primary contradiction for Black people within the U.S. is between us as a whole people and the U.S. North American state. So, there are those who, talk about within capitalism, the fundamental contradiction is at the point of production, right? This is the place where things are produced, commodities are produced, which is the basis within the capitalist system, the immediate basis for exploitation, right? So the point of production, that's where the theft of value from workers, come from. And this is what they argue, and this is the primary contradiction. And what we're saying is that for Africans, the primary contradiction is not at the point of production, but at the point of the bayonet, right? That the oppressive relationship that we have to the state that keeps us locked into this relationship. Y'all with me? Y'all with me? Okay. So it is the North American capitalist colonial state that maintains and enforces the colonial domination of our people. That's the state. It's the North American colonial state that locks us into this relationship. It is, and when we say the state, part of the state that we are dealing with right now, that's why the states play such a big role in our struggle. Almost every rebellion in this country has revolved around either the police or white people acting as a state. The police, which is an arm of the state, killing, oppressing, etc. It's this relationship to the state that is so fundamental to everything. That's the thing that keeps us locked into the whole capitalist system. In fact, it was this state that was forged through enslaving and colonized people that has been critical to the development of capitalism in many ways. So it is the arm of the U.S. imperialist state that has the prisons. It is an arm of the U.S. Imperialist state that has the prisons in this country bursting at the seams with African people. And it's interesting, we mentioned this. This is written in this is from I'm quoting now from a presentation 1982 or 83. But if you look at the 19 points in the declaration that we put forth, self-determination for African people in this country, we're talking about the same questions. Talking about the prisons, talking about unloading the prisons and stuff like that. People talk about the so-called massive mass incarceration. That ain't no new question. Police killing us and stuff, ain't no new. None of these questions that we're dealing with, but it's important to be able to go through this study now because there are people who are new to politics who are just discovering this, and in discovering this, actually assume that, that they, a little more advanced than they are, because this is not a new discovery. It's like white people discovering America. You know, it's already there. What they call America anyway. It is a state that attacked Bessie Woods and has her locked up for defending herself from a rape attack and a historical colonialist terror tactic by a North American man. But while we say that the main or primary or fundamental contradiction confronting African people within current U.S. borders does not occur at the point of production, or is not between our relationship to the existing means of production, we do not mean that we do not face a contradiction at the point of production at all. The fact that the majority of Black people work for a living, and that we have a fundamental antagonistic contradiction with the U.S. capitalist colonial state discloses the objective basis for unity between our struggles for national liberation and socialism. A successful struggle by the U.S. North American working people, will also demand the destruction of the U.S. North American ruling class state. One would think that, wouldn't we? But we don't hear that coming from anybody who's talking about socialism. The white people who are talking about socialism, whether it's Bernie Sanders or any others. It's hard for them to get to that question, but we have to get to that question. If they recognize this, if they recognize this, and this is one of the things that makes African internationalism so important, is that the North American left, so-called Marxists or communists and what have you, would recognize the state is the means by which the capitalist class maintains its rule. It's the primary method that the capitalist class used to maintain capitalist exploitation. Without the state, you couldn't do that. And if knowing that, you would think that would mean that they would be willing to unite with the African people and the Mexican people in overturning this relationship we have with the state. That would be, every time there's a killing of an African, they should be storming the barricades, you know, because it weakens the state to do this. But they don't do that, because they too were given birth by the same process that gave birth to capitalism. You with me? And so while they can fight for control, they cannot, that is to say, as white people, so-called white workers, which is another group of white people who would now ascend to leadership, they would be presiding over an economy that is still parasitic, that still requires exploitation of the vast majority of the peoples of the world. And that ain't no change at all. And that's the thing that we say, that the class question is concentrated in the colonial question. And genuine forces who want to fight for socialism in the world would find themselves joining the African People's Solidarity Committee or Uhuru Solidarity Movement, you know, as the way to get there. So we say Black workers who are the heart of the Black liberation movement will unite with North American workers at the point of production and lead the struggle against our common class enemy. Black people, under the leadership of these same workers and their fighting party, the African People's Socialist Party, will attack and lay siege upon the U.S. North American capitalist colonial state, which must be smashed to oblivion if either national liberation or socialism is to ever be realized. It is upon this realization that all our work in the African People's Socialist Party is guided as we struggle against U.S. imperialism from within its own borders. It is upon this realization that we have developed a strategy for liberation from U.S. imperialism from within. And I'm going to go through this and see where we are on time. I do hope that I do, you know, want us to have some discussion. I want to leave room for discussion, but I'm going to quickly go through this. And there's, we say our by the way, that conference was organized by Akbar Muhammad Ahmed, who is also known as Max Stanford, who was a founder of the African People's Party, who was a founding member of the Revolutionary Action Movement, RAM, which was a really important organization in the early 1960s, he worked with Malcolm X, among others, and himself was hounded by the US government for a number of years, accused of plotting to bomb the Statue of Liberty and do some other really exciting things. His politics is not necessarily the same now as it was then. It's not obviously the same. I met with him. Was there anybody here who was with me when we were at the, Comrade Muteba was with me when we ran into him in Philadelphia at the book fair, at the Uhuru Flea Market book fair. And that's important also, that's where we ran into him, because he was there, but this is our book fair. It's a statement of just the continuity of our movement and the development of our movement. He was really an important force. I just wanted to acknowledge the importance of his political work in the past. So this is what the strategy, stated simply, the strategy calls for. This is page 79. 1, winning African people in the US to a position of struggling for political independence. If we're going to be free, then if we're going to be independent, then Africans have to fight for it, have to believe in it. I mean, you can want all the independence you want to, you and your several branches of the party or the Uhuru movement, you can want independence. You can talk independence, but a strategy requires us to win the masses of African people to the position of a struggle for political independence. That has to be won politically. That means that we have to come up with various means, tactics, and what have you to convince Africans that that's what it's about. That means that every article that we write in the Burning Spear that talks about this police killing, that police killing, is not just to say how bad the police is, but it's also a statement to African people. That's why we have to have our own government, our own political independence. That's what we're doing all the time. 2, establishing the leadership of the pro-independence movement or anti-colonial movement. That's what we said. That earlier on, that's what the party has done a lot to establish the general leadership of the pro-independence movement. 3, winning support for the independence or anti-colonial position within current US borders. So we want others, in addition to us, to be able to support our position for African being free and independent. And we take that out in various ways. We establish various kinds of relationships based on unity with the struggle of African people being independent. 4, creating dual or competing or contending governmental powers. We create our own power. That's what the thing that we're going to be doing tomorrow with the Tyrone Lewis, when we put up our own rename the street corner in our community. That's what the Panthers did. In the case of, I've forgotten what year it was, when they, in the 1960s, when there was this serious traffic situation, the Panthers were going to put up their own stop sign. It's to become self-governing. And that's what it means for us to create these institutions that we create. They're not just institutions. We are arming people with the capacity for self-government. So dual, we create our own power, our own contending power, and there are those who know it. For example, people who want to claim to be friends of ours just recently sent some criticism to us because they say they've been supporting us and they knew us from Berkeley, but I think this came from, I think it was from Oakland. They said they discovered that the workers in Oakland, Africans, are being exploited because they're not getting paid a living wage and they don't have insurance and other kind of benefits, right? And so they discovered this and they said that, we got to fix this because they don't want to sort of this to get out. In other words, they're threatening that if we don't do something about this, that they're going to expose us, that we've committed some kind of offense. They attack us, not because workers, but living wage, I mean, all of our workers, you know, are paid at least minimum wages, but they attack us for not, like we Walmart, you know, they attack us for something that very few companies in this country or the world are doing in terms of what they call a living wage. They attack us because they want to crush us. They don't want to crush Walmart because they'd be with picket signs out there every day. If that was a real concern, look at all the African workers working at Walmart, working at all these other joints that don't pay a living wage and don't provide. And Walmart hire you only for a certain period of time, so they don't have to give you benefits. They attack us despite the fact that our institutions, which create a certain kind of dual power, also subsidize other things that we're doing for the entire African population. So if an individual worker is not making living wages, what that worker is getting is something that contributes to the whole community. Who else is doing the kinds of health fairs that we do in the park in Philly? How many other Walmart? How many flea markets or anything like that Walmart has, where more than 100 people can come out and vend and be able to act as a incubator to create businesses of their own in our communities? Or how many try to create wellness centers and stuff like this? The government doesn't do this, but the party does this because we're working. And that's what this person who claims to be some kind of supporter is someone who's fighting us precisely because we have created this dual power, and they want to find chinks in our armor that they can exploit in order to keep that from coming to fruition. It's a bogus, kind of argument, but it's because they see the significance in the whole issue of African people having dual power and control of our own institutions. And so they would hold us to some standard that they ought to be holding major corporations that's based on exploitation, that's based on this accumulation of capital for the sake of capitalist accumulation that's going to two people or to some kind of capitalist corporation. They would try to destroy the corporation of the people because of what it means for our freedom. 5, exposing the oppressive or anti-democratic nature of the United States government. We want to expose the oppressive and anti-democratic nature of the U.S. government. That's really important. That's why I was in struggle just recently with an article, with something that we've had up, and we do this occasionally, that sometimes we argue in a fashion that justify the existence and the stance of the government. Our thing is to expose it, expose that it's oppressive, expose that it's anti-democratic. There's nothing democratic about this damn government. 6, winning international support for our independence or anti-colonial position. And 7, building an African People's Liberation Army. And you look at number 6, we just went to Moscow on a few occasions, but we travel all around the world because we want the people to unite with our struggle for independence from the United States government. So people who might see us going there, that was this year, well, I think I might have been there this year, last year, whenever, might think that they're looking at some new phenomenon, but this is a part of a strategy that we've been working with for years and years and years. People should read this pamphlet, by the way, that came out. This was a presentation that was made in 1977. So we say 11 years ago, an editorial, and 11 years ago, this was in 1990 when this political report was made. So that would have been in 1978, right? 11 years? 79? Okay, yeah. 11 years ago, an editorial in the Burning Spear on December 1979 made an excellent summary of the political and ideological leadership of our party in rebuilding our movement up to then. The greater portion of that editorial is reprinted here for its obvious value to us today. I'm going to go through some of this because it may be of some significance, and then I'm going to open it up for discussion. On September 23rd, 1979, the African People's Socialist Party adopted a 14-point working platform, which beginning with this issue will appear in each issue of the Burning Spear. And this was in 1979, this was written. The 14-point platform and our decision to publish it in the Spear represent a new period in the development of the US-based African liberation movement and the African People's Socialist Party. On the one hand, and remember, we're talking about the theory, the impact of the theory of African internationalism. On the one hand, it is concrete evidence that our movement has generally overcome an essential debilitating effect of the US military assault on our movement during the latter part of the 1960s and the early 1970s, which included widespread political assassination, imprisonment and exile of our leadership, and the destruction of our militant organization. Remember that period. That's what the government did. A debilitating, if Malcolm X did not die of old age, nor did Martin Luther King or most of the meaningful leaders, you know, were assassinated, imprisoned, hounded, and what have you by the United States government. This wonderful damn government that people would have us, you know, saluting, and people would condemn Donald Trump for saying bad things about, and the one that Hillary Clinton herself would uphold, this government. The debilitating effect of this assault on a rudderless movement without clarity and direction, and unable to organize the broad masses of our people. On the other hand, the APSP's decision to adopt and publish the party's 14-point working platform is further evidence of the leading role played by the African People's Socialist Party in our movement's ability to overcome its leaderless and directionless drift. That's what we've been talking about recently, haven't we? Leaderless and directionless drift. Partially due to the APSP's leadership, our movement is now capable of speaking with greater coherence and ideological clarity. Additionally, it has begun to learn to transform ideological conclusions into practical struggles. The party's disciplined leadership in overcoming the problems of general leadership and ideological clarity for our movement began almost at the time of its founding. The first evidence of this leadership on a national and international level was our determination to republish the Burning Spear newspaper in 1973. This decision had the subjective intent and the objective result of unifying our movement through providing practical information and summations of struggles throughout the world, ideological discussions throughout the US, and a general information clearinghouse for the entire movement. In 1975, the Spear ran a polemical piece on colonialism, which was reprinted by the APSP in a pamphlet in pamphlet form under the title Colonialism, the Main Problem Confronting Africans in the US. The colonialism piece proved to be an important unifying tool for the Black liberation movement. For among other things, it provided the first, most successful ideological fight back against ideological imperialist forces, which had provided the ideological and political cover for the state's military measures used to destroy our organizations and movement. Because the ideological imperialists, which is simply the white communists, so-called communists and leftists, they made major assaults on the Black liberation movement, and they worked in alliance with what white power, the state was attacking our movement everywhere. So you had the physical, political assault on the movement by the government, assassination, stuff like that on the one hand. Then you had this ideological assault that was coming from our allies, the white communists. The colonialism pamphlet was widely distributed and most definitely marked the turning point in uniting and leading the entire revolutionary anti-African nationalist movement in the ideological struggles against the well-read, bookish, ideological imperialists who hid their anti-Black colonialist activities with communist and left-sounding neo-imperialist terms and formulations. The colonialism pamphlet also put forth the party's discovery of the relationship of race to class, a question which had plagued the progressive Black movement in the US for many years. As the APSP was also using the Spear to report and sum up various struggles occurring throughout the world, the colonialism pamphlet, together with the Spear, had an immediate impact on the movement as a guide to practical activity. The APSP made another significant ideological and political contribution to the Black liberation movement with the publication and wide distribution of our pamphlet, The Political Aspects of Building a Mass Movement, the Tactical and Strategical Objectives for Black Liberation. Although the pamphlet was published in May 1979, the material it contained was presented at a Black student conference in April 1977 and had been widely read in the sphere and other forms since it was first put forward in 1977. In 1975 was the year the APSP adopted the case of Desi Woods. The Desi Woods struggle gave us an opportunity to demonstrate on a national level how to make struggle around political prisoners from a revolutionary nationalist perspective without bowing to white left liberalism or ideological imperialist opportunism. It has been a struggle that the entire Black liberation movement has learned from. Then in Atlanta, but throughout, there's a whole, people should read this because you can see the role of the party in upholding and forwarding the African liberation movement for anti-colonial movement for self-determination, even when the broad movement was incapable of defending itself. This is a long chapter, and I'm going to stop now so that we can have the benefit of some kind of discussion. I think it would be important. I hope people have read and will read this study. I hope people will read the pamphlet that we were talking about, the Tactics and Strategies for Black Liberation, as well, because I think it's informative. And I think, again, part of what we're talking about is something that grounds our people in some kind of scientific and strategically based politics, so that it's not just a matter of whether white people like us or we like the white people, or the white man is the devil, or some kind of mutation or something to that effect. There's a political world that we live in, and we think it's incredibly important to understand that and be able to struggle with the forces that we deal with here on the earth. So I want to stop now, and I want to open it up for a discussion. Before that, just let me be clear that I would like to make sure who we have with us. Go ahead, comment. What you say? Okay, we can do it later. I've been told by the real leadership of this process that we'll do it later. Okay, so let's open it up then. And that means that people have to be here later, you know, as opposed to, but let's go ahead and open it up for discussion.
I have some questions from online.
So some online questions? Go ahead.
It's from yesterday.
Okay.
So increasingly I'm running into Africans who claim the American land base as their own by explaining their relationship to indigenous people, Africans that came before Columbus, and Moors. Is this also a part of that mythological politic of the African petty bourgeoisie? It is,
because what it does is it liquidates the significance of excuse me, the political work that we have to take on. I mean, we could claim based on that France and other places, because Africans were the original people that went everywhere. It's an opportunist stance. That the fact is that the contradictions that we are confronted with is not something that started here in the United States when somebody took our land in the United States. The people who were dispossessed in the United States were the indigenous population. There's no way to get around that. And with whom we need to have a relationship. And we've got a land that all Black people around the world have some kind of identification with, and that is called Africa. And that's what a big struggle is. And I think that we have to find every way we can to establish a political relationship with the indigenous peoples here. I say peoples because there's still unresolved issues and questions that have to be resolved with many of the Spanish-speaking residents in the Americas, who in I think some circumstances might even be considered to be Spanish-speaking indigenous people. And that's where we need to have a powerful political relationship with those forces who are struggling against this common enemy. So it's opportunist. I mean, and why not say that France is ours or some other places, since Africans were the first to be anywhere on the planet Earth. And there's a political reality that we're confronted with today. It's not based on the fact that we were here a long time ago before, of people who we now characterize as indigenous. Uhuru.
Earlier when you were speaking about the struggle within African people and the petty bourgeoisie and the class, you know, and even right now, like in the struggle, you have organizations that have just blossomed and came about, and you see this, that they're very militant, and sometimes they have guns, and we have to be prepared to be able to challenge them politically, you know, to really help them understand what are you really struggling for, because it's an organization that is called New Era. And I've been on panel discussions with them, and it was just, I knew more about their, you know, they layout or what they say that they're fighting for than the people that are leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because I was in an organization that when we knew that we were going to go up against them, we wanted to know who are they, and what they believe and what they want, what is they to what end. And so me and Chimaranga read the whole thing. And so when I went into this discussion, I'm asking him and he didn't know. And the whole platform of the New Era movement is basically saying we want to be able to oppress our own people. And this is not fair for white people to be the only ones to be able to do that. That's what the whole layout is saying, is that we want space.
Yeah.
We need space to be able to have business so we can be the oppressive nation. You know, nothing about overturning, nothing about liberation for all African people, but we need this space. And so they look real militant. They walk the streets, and it's very oppression to women. They felt that they shouldn't even have to even talk to me because I was a woman, and women should be, and it's a lot of women in this organization, but they probably haven't read the platform either. That, you know, they haven't read, you know, they just joining stuff. And, you know, I really appreciate this process. And the other thing I wanted to say is the Black grand jury, when you mentioned it, I was talking to him table yesterday, and I was telling him that I had been coming around and listening to Africa Live and things like that, but I was really won to the Hulu movement and at the Black grand jury, because a lot of times African people don't even understand this word of power or understand this whole, we don't even, because this is something that's very foreign to us. So we can't even imagine it. And the Black grand jury actually gave me eyes to imagine myself and gave me power to understand. And my father is poor working class, but petty bourgeoisie speaks through him, and he has this interest because that's the only thing he knows. And he couldn't condemn the police. He couldn't, even though they had beat him. They had sick dogs on him, but he still felt like he was obligated to defend this. And we see this over and over again. Every family, they get up and they have to say why they child, you know, I know that they were bad, you know, they did some stuff, but, you know, they didn't deserve to die. I didn't always do everything right. And we see this all the time. So I just really appreciate this study, and I appreciate the party. And that's why it's so important, like you said, the parents, you know, to engage the parents. I've been, you know, I have a 5-year-old that just went into the school system. They come home and say, well, why do I have to be brown every day? Because in her head, the only reason why my teacher give me bad colors is because I'm brown. If I was white, then she probably would like me better. You know, at 5, she's like, okay, mom, she always was trying to convince me that white people wasn't that bad. But now she's like, you know what? It's some truth to what she was saying at 5. And so engaging other parents, because a lot of times African people suffer in silence. We don't talk about it amongst each other. So being at the bus stop and community, we gotta be able to really have the conversation, be prepared to have the conversation. Because like you said, you know, everybody might not join EPDM, but they can align themselves, and they can understand and sort of even imagine what we're trying to create, a new world, and to see that this is not it. You know, you don't have to just feel like that this is it. I mean, I think that we've been surviving for so long that it's just like, just get through the day.
Uhuru. Anyone else?
There's a comment on Facebook that it's not a question or anything. I just would really prefer if you addressed it. It says we do not need communism, but should have a monarchy from our government.
A monarchy from government? Well, the fact is that we do need communism because, you know, any society that's based on class, and that's what they're just talking about. You got a monarchy, you're talking about class rule. It's just the monarchy is the ruling class. It's just the nobility, that's the ruling class. And that's a step backwards in history. And what we're saying is that the ruling class, the workers need to become the new ruling class, the African working class, at least for a brief period of time until there is a society that doesn't have any rulers at all, that there is no ruling class, that the people who produce, and that's who produces. The monarchy doesn't produce a damn thing. There's no, you found not find in history where a king had a job. You know, the monarchy doesn't produce. Everything is produced by laboring people. But the problem is that the laboring people don't have any authority.
Right.
And the only ones with the authority is the people who reap the benefit of the labor.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can have laboring people who which means you have socialized production. The people are socialized in producing everything we need, whether it's growing corn or whether it's making houses. It's social. People collectively do that. But then you've got either some nobility that collects the benefit from that. And if that nobility is benevolent, then it shares out, you know, among the people who produced it. Or you have a capitalist system like now, where, you know, they take it off the top. That's what we talk about, the point of production. They take it off the top. Well, what about the working people? I mean, who produce all the value? And what we're saying is, and that's what they call communism, but that's what everybody had, most people had before we ran into white people. We lived where people produced collectively and the society collectively owned what was produced, owned the means of producing, etc. That's the kind of society we want. And that's the society without exploitation. If you got that kind of society, you have a situation where jealousy is minimized if it exists anymore, because why do you have anything to be jealous? If we own everything collectively, what's the basis of the jealousy that we have? You know, it would affect everything, including personal relationships, because even the personal relationships that we experience in most of the world today, much of the world today, even the so-called relationships, you know, like between men and women, based on property relationships, as quiet as it's kept. And people have to know who you're sleeping with in order to make sure that the children that you have will be able to inherit their own private stuff from generation to generation. And you get the emergence of what they call sex love as a consequence of this, you know, which causes all kinds of confusion in society and among human beings. This advent of sex love, you know, because you know it's hard. People don't hardly know how to love each other if sex is not involved, and sex become a determining, you know, just plays such a big role like that. And I'm not speaking as well. Anyway, I won't mess with that. So I'm just saying that a society based on genuine equality is when the society collectively owns and controls. Jealousy is no basis, or you minimize the basis for jealousy. You know, doesn't mean that. Yeah. Let me just leave it at that. Well, the basis of theft and crime, and right now, I mean, for example, in this country, you've got you know, children who are stuffed into prisons on a regular basis, and you know, 14 years old, charged as an adult. And there's no assumption that there's anything wrong with society. It's always wrong with the child. It's always wrong with the people. And that's what monarchies and other kind of class-based societies can do. It can't criticize the society itself. It criticizes the human beings who, you know, are in that society. So anyway, Uhuru. Is there anybody else?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question. It's not from online or anything, but when you were speaking earlier about, you know, how the party used to push racism. I was just wondering like how you guys came to the conclusion that racism was just the idea in white people's head, and instead that colonialism was what we should be fighting against.
We've never just pushed racism.
Right.
What I've said is that sometimes we'd say colonialism and then we say racism, and somehow, you know,
it kind of mixed together.
Yeah, I mean, it was almost like you could, yeah.
Like it was used interchangeably?
Sometimes, yeah. And we never, I mean, because I have personally always been uncomfortable with the concept of racism, because that's where all the science sort of breaks down. When you, I mean, how can a racism be killing you? How can somebody is a racist? I mean, you know, it's an individual thing. This person doesn't like, and everybody don't like us, etc. I mean, it's always been, you know, the colonial question has always been much of my political history is one that I've been able to unite with. But like, until you, as your theory is ill-defined and ill-developed, what happens is you will find yourself borrowing theory and concepts, even from the oppressor, or even from class enemies and stuff like that. And I see that in some of what was laid out in here in 1990. But increasingly, I think we've been successful in moving beyond that and creating a whole new basis for theoretical and political understanding. I really mean that, a whole new basis that challenges most of how people have described in the scientific terms, you know, like the reality that humanity has been confronted with for a long period of time. And so we've never been that. And the problem that you have with racism is no matter how hard you try, you can't really come up with practical solutions. And this would be one of the things that would create a problem for us. Like, okay, if racism is the question, then, you know, you got to have some practical way to attack it, you know. And how do you do that? How do you practically attack racism without having to attack yourself? And by that, what I mean is making yourself somebody or a group of people that is acceptable to white people. It's absolutely, you're stuck. You're really stuck on making white people change their mind about you. You're stuck, which means if you come stuck with trying to make white people change their mind about you, you can't hit one upside the head. You understand?
Right.
Because that confirms, see, told you about those darkies, right? And so, and that's just a deadly trap, and it's a trap for everybody, not just for us. Even people might want to be your ally. That if they got to like you in order to be your ally, if they got to like you in order to support your position on anti-colonialism against imperialism, that's a problem. Yeah. I don't require you to like me. I don't give a damn whether you like me or not. What I want you to do, I mean, people get married to each other across national lines and stuff, Africans and white people marry, etc. But they can't stay married if they dealt with the real political question, if they dealt with the colonial question. Because how can you love me, right, and hate black people? How can you love me and then not want African people to be independent and free? It's absolutely impossible. How can you be, if you know, how they call a sisterhood is powerful? How can you love African women, white woman, and not love the notion of African people being free from U.S. and white colonial domination? How can you love white homosexuals, LGBTQ person on the one hand, and then not want African people, you know, like to be free from white colonial domination? It's BS. So that personalizes it, and that liquidates the political questions that we're confronted with. And so that racism stuff is treacherous, you know, anyway. Yeah. Anybody else? We only, well, actually, we've outdone it. You were going to say something, Comrade? Okay, we've really gone beyond our time, and I didn't have an opportunity to measure how people experience this study because I talked along and then give you a chance to talk, and that's problematic. I'm hoping that it was a beneficial study, and I truly hope that people will read this. It's not just something, you know, that we're doing just to have people better able, to talk to their Facebook friends, but we want to be able to inform our practice and help us to make the struggle. And we want people to be better informed about making this crucial decision to join and be with the African People's Socialist Party and the overall Uhuru movement. I want to say that, and also on today, I wanted to announce for people who are in this area that at 4 o'clock, is that right, 4 o'clock? We'll be dealing with the 20th anniversary of the police murder of Tyrone Lewis, 18 years old. Happened 1996 in the city of St. Petersburg, led to incredible rebellion where African people rose up in a very serious way and led to a couple of weeks later attack on the Uhuru House, African people bringing a helicopter down by gunfire. It in many ways anticipated what happened in Ferguson and Milwaukee and other places that we've seen, Baltimore. So that's today at 4 o'clock. Commemorate the struggle and resistance resulting from the October 24th, 1996 murder of Tyrone Lewis. Also, I'm really struggling and encouraging everybody who is in this call and to do everything you can to get to Washington, D.C. on November 5th and 6th for the Black is Back Coalition National Black People's Convention, which is going to be a 2-day convention of resistance starting on the 4th with a rally at Malcolm X Park at noon, marching at 2 o'clock on the White House. And then after the march to the White House, across the street from the White House, another rally at Lafayette Park. And then on Sunday, November 6th, the convention will move to Howard University, where we'll have further discussion of the National Black People's agenda for political agenda for self-determination. It's going to be really important. We want to use this as Black People's Convention while we watching this what approximates insanity that's called the electoral process in this country with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, the Democrats and Republican Party and others, neither of which is addressing the critical questions important to African people here and around the world. So we want to hear the people who don't follow Hillary Clinton around and didn't follow Bernie Sanders around, but whose children and families have been affected by police murder, by imprisonment, by terror, and various other things. Ordinary African people need to have an opportunity to speak. And so many of those people, mothers of people who have been killed by, their children killed by police, many of them will be there. People will come bearing large photos of their loved ones, come carrying banners and what have you, sometimes with the names of people who've been murdered by police in this country. And so 2 days after our convention ends on the 6th, the selection process for president will be completed with either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton descending to what is the presidency in this country. And so it's really important for Africans to make our own statement. So I'm calling on everybody who is participating in this study to come out, to get other people to come out, to make sure that you put it on social media to arm other people, to inform other people. There's a 19-point platform that has come with as a part of a declaration, and you need to use all of your capacity to get it out to all your friends and everybody that you're in contact with social media. So those are two of the things that I want to announce. Is there something else we need to mention? People who are interested in joining the party should go to what? joinapsp.org. Go to joinapsp.org. Also, there's going to be in Boston the Days in Solidarity with the African People. It's going to be incredible. Speaking there will be Kunde Mwamvita, who is the mother of one of 3 children killed by the Pinellas County Sheriff Department. Her daughter was Dominique Battle, who was 16 years old, along with her 2 15-year-old girlfriends. They were murdered, pushed into a pond and drowned to death by the Pinellas County Sheriff Department. That's going to be in Boston when? Does somebody have the date for that? That's going to be tomorrow, the 24th in Boston. I don't have information exactly where that's going to be, but you can get that by going to where? Event, is it on the event?
It should be on
Don't tell me where it is.
UhuruSolidarity.org.
Where is it?
Facebook.
It's on where? Uhuru, yes.
That is on Day in Solidarity with African People Boston, and on Facebook you can get all the information at their event page.
The community church
Day
in
in
Boston.
Solidarity Boston.
Okay, that's Community Church in Boston. Day in Solidarity Boston. Go to the event page, and then also and we'll be in Seattle on when? On the 29th, Seattle. And also in Boston, I'm speaking will be Penny Hess, chairwoman of the African People Solidarity Committee, Jesse Neville, who is the head of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. And then on the 29th, be in Seattle University. I expect a large turnout there. And again, where can they go to get this information quickly? Facebook. Where?
Day in Solidarity,
Day in Solidarity.
Solidarity, Seattle.
Oh, Seattle. Again, Kunde will be there. I will be there. Penny Hess and Jesse Neville will also be presenters at that. And like I said, we expect a large turnout there. And hopefully everybody who can get there will be there with us as well. And the Burning Spear newspaper obviously is accessible. Everybody ought to be reading it. I was just reading about it in during this study. And you can come to theburningspear.com and get information on that. Get your newspaper. Those of you who got the newspaper should be pushing them like hell. Let's go ahead and get as many spears as we can out there in the world. We're in a great contest, a war of ideas, as you know, and we need everybody in the world to be reading about the kinds of things that we just talked about today. Thank you, brothers and sisters. We're 8 minutes over, and we'll do better than this next time out. We still want to just get a sense of who's here. I know we have Mutable